This is an example of what we're trying to talk about. I called up Dr. Loco the other day and I said, look, I'm going up to Harvard, going to do this work with Cornel. Make sure I got this song straight, what you were trying to do with this song. He said, I wanted to do We Shall Overcome bilingually, because that's how the farm workers used to sing this song. But I wanted to be respectful of African American traditions of churchfulness. I wanted to be uplifting in a little different way. I wanted to have an upbeat on it. I wanted to respect those traditional roots and yet reflect the future. I wanted to transculturate. I wanted to bring a fusion. So I joined the traditional notion of We Shall Overcome with trade winds from the Caribe and added soca to it, which is a combination of soul and calypso, which is developed in Cuba, Puerto Rico, Colombia, New Orleans. He said, so I went to Wayne Wallace. Wayne Wallace was the soloist on that trombone who arranges for Aretha Franklin and Santana, and I said, let's put this thing together. Let's put together a new kind of We Shall Overcome that would represent the deeper connections between Latinos and Chicanos and Africans, which are often ignored by both. He said, Chicanos are enriched by more and more of the Caribeño styles. We're more Africanized than people realize. Even than some African American peoples, we may be more Africanized. It's not that we're ripping off. This is part of who we are, part of our gusto. It's not like Paul Simon going to South Africa or doing Cape Man. He said the boogie and the blues is in our lives. We acknowledge this. And it may be partly a problem for some black folks, some in Latin America, some black intellectuals. Why don't they acknowledge the Latin tinge that's been so important in the black community all these years? Talk about Dizzy Gillespie, he was Latinized. Talk about Jelly Roll Morton, he was Latinized. It's our gusto. And this is part of what we want to be able to acknowledge, especially, Dr. Loco said, when you're over there on the East Coast, man. Part 2, a meditation on some ideas, the brown millennium. Let me begin this meditation in the same place that Cornel West began in his contribution to the book, The Future of the Race, co-authored with Henry Louis Gates Jr. I began where Cornel begins, but with a little different slant, a little different shade. Cornel began in that long and wonderful essay he wrote called Black Strivings in a Twilight Civilization with W.E.B. Du Bois, the souls of black folks. He doesn't say in that essay what immediately stands out to me, and certainly he knows that the book, The Souls of Black Folk, begins with a chapter called The Forethought. Not the foreword or the preface, but the forethought. That is to say, the first thought, the thought before the thought, or in History of Religion's language, the primordial thought that informs a great deal of discourse about race among African American peoples. W.B. Du Bois begins that book in the forethought with, herein lie buried many things, which if read with patience, may show the strange meanings of being black here in the dawning of the 20th century. This meaning is not without interest to you, gentle reader, for the problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line. Is saying in this book, buried in this book, hidden, obscure, maybe even slightly dead, are strange meanings, meanings of strange fruit that can be brought to light and life with patient reading. And among the strange meanings comes that supposedly tell-all line. But the problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line. Later in a chapter called The Afterthought, he says he hopes that this careful reading will lead to a springing out of the pages, quote, vigor of thought and thoughtful deeds to reap the harvest wonderful. We have a song about that in Spanish. It's called La Semilla. Depende en la semilla lo que quieras cosechar. The double consciousness. This is a brilliant and still marvelous tool to help humans in America think about the complexities of being or becoming Americano. The primordial thought, the thought before the thought. I see it informing the work of Toni Morrison, Gates, and Cornel West. I want to talk about buried things and strange meanings of being Latino. I'm not speaking to you from the line. I'm not speaking to you from the color line, though you must return to that line and lines about the color lines. And you got to safeguard that line because you got to keep alert. The minute you think there's something rosy about this line, Ed Rollins comes along to tell lies about black preachers in Trenton selling out to the establishment. Burnt churches appear all over the country. Prisons get filled up more with black people. guns at the back door of your house. But I want to speak to you from the borderlands, the moving borderlands of Latin America and Latino America. I'm not just talking about the borderlands of the Rio Grande or the Nueces River or what Puerto Ricans call El Charco or the imaginary Wilma Treviso. I'm talking about and from the borderlands that have widened and stretched and immigrated. You see, it's not just people from Latin America who immigrate. It's the borderlands that have immigrated. The languages, the food, the culture, the family patterns. You know, the borderland of the United States moved south. It immigrated in 1848 when it took in California, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, part of Colorado and Utah. It moved south in 1898 when Puerto Rico was annexed. It's still moving. But there's now this other kind of movement of sexual fire, musical heat. The myths, the drugs, the players, the ideas are moving north. I recently heard someone say the U.S.-Mexican border has moved north to Wisconsin. But the borderlands I'm speaking about are wide borderlands, borderlands with expanding shapes. I'm talking about cities. The borderlands that moved to Los Angeles, which is one of the great linguistic, social, and racial borderlands. The borderlands that constitute New York. Someone said recently the good thing about New York is that it's very close to the United States. The Puerto Rican cultural critic Arcadio Diaz-Quiñones, in his new book, La Memoria Rota, The Broken Memory, shows us that New York has been a Caribbean city, a Puerto Rican city for over 100 years. Witnessed to and deeply influenced by the lives, writings, songs, and struggles of many illustrious Puerto Rican people, Jose Marti, Celia Cruz, and others, and that today Bomba y Plena appears in all the immigrant neighborhoods from Lorain, Ohio, to Hartford, from Perth Amboy to Hawaii. Miami, the city on the edge. Denver, the city in the air. Boston, the city that's green once a year. But is it also migrating south against all its historical biases to Latin America? San Juan, the city in the painful sea. San Francisco, the city of Dr. Loco and the Rocking Jalapeno Band. El Paso, the city of the violated outrage, where the old gringo made his fateful crossing and the drugs from Latin America make theirs. El Paso is passing up to Chicago, and these borderlands, these expanding borderland cities, are softening provincialisms that not only African Americans and Latinos and white people have to realize, but the Mexicans and the Latin Americans themselves. Oh yes, there's a lot of that kind of draw the line in Latin America by Mexicans themselves. They are faced with the notion of this expanding borderlines. We have a dividing line song in Mexico. It goes like this. Yo soy mexicano de acá de este lado. De acá de este lado, puro mexicano. Aunque la gente me jure tejano, yo les aseguro que soy mexicano de acá de este lado. Well, Latin Americans are going to have to get used to the fact that these borderlands are expanding into their communities as well. And they can't claim this privilege of de acá de este lado when they come up here and want to disassociate themselves from Latinos and say, estamos de acá de este lado. One of the most remarkable young scholars in the Chicano community today is Carlos Ibanez, Vélez Ibanez, and what he's done in a new book called Border Visions is to demonstrate how cultural glue along the Mexican border, which is all the way up, you see in Kansas, and all the way down at the bottom of Monterrey, is constantly replenished through strong family ties that reach across both sides of the border. He describes ways in which Mexicans have resisted and accommodated the dominant culture by creating communities and by forming labor unions, voluntary associations, and cultural movements. He analyzes what he calls the distribution of sadness, of overrepresentation of Mexicans in poverty, crime, illness, and war, and shows how that sadness is balanced by creative expression of literature and art, especially mural art, in the ongoing search for space and place. I do believe that one of the problems of the 20th century will be the problem of the color line, or to say it differently, the colors lines, within another social political context, another setting that will impinge on these categories. And I call this the ecumenopolis.